Wake the maid on my chest, and you die." The warning rolled across the throne room so quietly that several nobles failed to breathe for a full second. Silver goblets froze halfway to trembling mouths. Boots stopped against the black marble floor. Even the torch flames along the stone pillars seemed to shrink from the sound of the Alpha King's voice. Because there she was, a maid, curled asleep against the most feared ruler in the north. Her cheek rested over the center of his chest, one small hand tangled loosely in the dark fabric of his coat, as if she had fallen asleep there by accident, as if she belonged there. The sight alone felt wrong enough to make the room uneasy. King Cale Thornwyn never allowed anyone near him after battle returns. Not advisors, not guards, certainly not servants. Stories claimed the Black Wolf of the North once shattered a council table because a physician touched his shoulder without permission while stitching a wound. Yet this morning, the king sat motionless upon the obsidian throne, with a pale young maid sleeping against him, while dried blood darkened the leather around his ribs. The doors behind the council groaned softly in the cold wind sweeping through the hall. No one moved. No one dared. The maid's breathing remained slow and deep, completely unaware of the silence surrounding her. A strand of silver-blonde hair stirred against Cale's coat with every breath she took. One of the older nobles swallowed hard. "Your Majesty," Lord Varick began carefully, keeping his eyes lowered. "Perhaps the girl should be removed before the southern delegates arrive." The king did not answer immediately. That made it worse. Kael's gaze remained fixed somewhere beyond the towering windows, where snow drifted across the mountain cliffs outside the citadel. Huge black wolves carved into the stone walls watched over the chamber like silent judges. Then the king's fingers moved once against the maid's waist. Protective, instinctive. Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. A servant near the doorway quietly stepped backward. Kael Thornwyn noticed everything. Fear moved through the room like cold water under ice. "Did you not hear me the first time?" the king asked softly. Lord Varick's face lost color. No one spoke again. Beneath the heavy fur cloak draped over the throne, the maid shifted slightly in her sleep. The movement pressed her closer against him. Every guard in the chamber stiffened at once. But instead of anger, the king lowered his eyes toward her with an expression so brief and subtle, it almost didn't exist at all. Almost. His jaw loosened, just for a second. Then the mask returned. The massive bronze doors opened again, letting in the sharp scent of snow and steel. 3 royal healers entered, carrying fresh bandages and bowls of steaming water. They stopped the instant they saw the throne. One nearly dropped the tray in his hands. Last night's rumors had already spread through the fortress like wildfire through dry woods. The king had returned from the eastern border barely standing after a rogue pack ambush near Black Hollow Pass. Half-shifted, bleeding, furious. 2 guards had reportedly lost consciousness from the pressure of his wolf aura alone. No healer could get close enough to treat him. No one except one frightened maid from the lower servants' wing, Alara Vale. A girl most people inside the castle barely remembered seeing before last night. Quiet, small, forgettable. Yet somehow she had entered the king's chambers carrying nothing but hot water and clean cloths. And by dawn, the violent storm shaking the upper tower had stopped completely. One of the younger healers glanced toward Alara now, confusion flickering across his face. "How is she still alive?" he whispered before he could stop himself. The sound barely left his mouth. But the Alpha King heard it. Kael slowly lifted his head. The room temperature seemed to drop with the movement alone. Then Alara stirred faintly against his chest, a soft, tired sound escaping her throat as her fingers tightened weakly against his coat. Instantly, the king's attention snapped back to her. His entire posture changed, sharpened, dangerous. The low growl that rumbled through his chest was almost too quiet to hear. Almost. "Careful," Kael said, and suddenly every soul inside the throne room understood the terrifying truth at the exact same moment. The Alpha King was not protecting the throne. He was protecting her. The throne room did not breathe normally again until the king finally rose from the obsidian chair. Even then, the silence followed him like a living thing. Alara remained asleep against his shoulder as he stood, wrapped loosely in the heavy black fur cloak hanging from his frame. A few council members lowered their eyes immediately. Others stared too long and quickly regretted it when Kyle's silver gaze drifted toward them. No one spoke. The king descended the throne steps slowly, one hand steady at the maid's back to keep her from slipping. Blood still marked the edge of his collar beneath the dark layers of leather and wool, but his stride remained powerful enough to tighten every chest in the room. The southern delegates had arrived only minutes earlier, yet none of them dared announce themselves now. A tall ambassador from the river territories shifted awkwardly near the doorway before bowing deeper than necessary. "Your Majesty," he murmured. Kyle walked past him without slowing. Alara stirred faintly at the movement. Her eyelashes fluttered once. The king immediately adjusted his hold. Small movement, barely noticeable. Still, the nearest guard saw it and looked away too quickly. That frightened him more than the growl earlier. The king carried her through the enormous corridor beyond the throne chamber, where morning light spilled pale and cold across black stone floors. Servants lined the walls with lowered heads. A few whispered under their breath the moment he passed. "That's her? The lower wing maid? Impossible." One young kitchen girl accidentally dropped a silver tray. The crash rang through the hall like thunder. Every servant flinched. Kael stopped walking. Instantly, the girl's face drained white. The tray spun once before settling across the floor beside scattered cups. No one moved to help her. The king turned his head slightly toward the trembling servant. For one terrible second, fear froze the entire corridor. Then Alara made a soft sound against his chest and tucked closer into the warmth of his coat. Kael's attention shifted back to her immediately. The tension cracked, not gone, but loosened enough for air to return to the hallway. "Clean it up," he said calmly, before continuing forward. The servant nearly collapsed from relief. At the far end of the corridor, High Priest Malker waited beside the towering doors leading into the royal wing. Gold chains gleamed across his crimson robes, while incense smoke curled around him in pale ribbons. His expression darkened the instant he saw Alara in the king's arms. "Your Majesty," the priest said carefully, "this is becoming dangerous." Kael kept walking. "The court is already speaking. The court always speaks. A servant girl cannot remain this close to the throne." The king reached the doors, stopped, not fully, just enough. A subtle pause that made the guards beside the entrance stiffen. Kael did not turn around right away. "Last night," he said quietly, "where were your healers?" Malser's jaw tightened. "Your wolf aura was unstable. The room was unsafe." Unsafe. The word rolled low through the corridor. Yet she entered. Silence. The priest glanced toward Alara as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Her pale hair spilled loosely across the king's arm. One of her hands still held the edge of his coat unconsciously, even in sleep. There were faint reddish marks around her wrist from carrying heavy water buckets through the night. Tiny details, hard details, real ones. Kael noticed them. His eyes lingered there 1 second too long. Something unreadable moved across his face before disappearing beneath cold control again. "She is only human," Malser warned softly. "No," Kael answered. "That is precisely the problem." The priest frowned slightly, unsettled by something in the king's tone. Before he could speak again, the doors opened inward. Warm air drifted from the royal chambers beyond. Kael stepped inside without another word. The guards immediately sealed the doors behind him with a heavy boom that echoed through the corridor. The whispers started again at once, quieter now, uneasy, curious. But inside the royal chamber, none of that noise followed. Only the crackling fire beside the massive bed and the slow rhythm of Alara's breathing filled the room. Kael lowered her carefully onto the edge of the mattress. The movement should have woken her. It didn't. She looked exhausted, completely drained. The king stood over her for a long moment, silent and still. Then his fingers hovered briefly above the bruise darkening her wrist. Hovered, paused, pulled back. Outside, snow battered the castle windows harder. Inside, the black wolf of the north remained beside the sleeping maid instead of returning to his throne. The first scream came from the western tower just after midnight. Not human, Not entirely wolf, either. The sound ripped through Blackthorn Citadel hard enough to rattle the window panes inside the royal chambers. Alara jerked awake instantly. The fire beside the massive stone hearth snapped and hissed as wind battered the castle from outside. For a disoriented second, she forgot where she was. Then she saw him. Kyle stood near the far balcony doors with one hand braced against the stone wall. Moonlight spilled across his broad shoulders and the dark marks spreading slowly beneath the bandages wrapped around his ribs. His breathing sounded wrong, uneven, heavy. Another distant howl echoed through the fortress corridors below, followed by the hurried clang of gates being sealed. Somewhere outside the room, armored boots pounded across stone. Alara pushed herself upright too quickly and winced as dizziness hit her. She had slept in the king's chambers, in the king's bed. Panic flashed across her face. Kyle noticed immediately, even through whatever storm raged behind his silver eyes. "Don't," he said roughly. Her hands froze against the blanket. "Your Majesty, A violent shudder moved through him before she could finish. The balcony doors trembled against their iron hinges. For one terrible moment, the shadow stretching behind him along the stone floor looked too large to belong to a man. Alara's breath caught softly in her throat. Kale lowered his head. "Stay back." Another order, quiet this time, dangerous in a different way. But then she saw it. Blood. Fresh blood dripping steadily through the bandages around his side onto the dark marble beneath him. One drop, then another. Her fear hesitated. Outside the chamber, raised voices erupted somewhere deeper in the royal wing. "Seal the upper corridor! Move the servants downstairs! He's shifting again!" A loud crash followed, glass breaking. Alara flinched instinctively toward the sound. Kale's gaze snapped toward her movement so fast it startled her. The air inside the room tightened. His pupils had changed, thinner now, brighter, wolfish silver glinting beneath the low firelight. "Do not open that door," he said. The command landed harder than before. Alara nodded quickly. Another tremor ran through him, this one worse. The king gripped the stone balcony arch so hard, a sharp cracking sound split through the chamber. Small fractures spidered beneath his fingers. Alara stared despite herself. No healer had stayed with him tonight. No guards either. Just silence, storm winds, and him trying very hard not to lose control. A sudden pounding slammed against the outer chamber doors. "Your Majesty," a guard shouted from outside. "The high priest requests immediate entrance." Kale closed his eyes briefly, just briefly, but it looked less like patience and more like pain. "Denied." "Sire, the council fears the curse is spreading through the lower halls." Another crash echoed somewhere far below the tower, this time followed by frightened shouting. The citadel itself seemed restless tonight. Torches flickered wildly through the narrow windows overlooking the inner courtyards, where guards rushed between stairwells carrying silver spears. Snow whipped violently through the open battlements. Alara slid carefully from the bed. Kale heard the movement instantly. His head turned. "I told you to stay back." "You're bleeding." "That is not your concern." Another lie. A weak one this time. Alara took one cautious step closer anyway, clutching the edge of a clean cloth she found beside the wash basin. Kale's jaw tightened visibly. His wolf did not like this. She could feel it now, thick pressure rolling through the room like invisible thunder. The instinct to run crawled cold along her spine. But beneath all of it, beneath the danger and fear and power shaking the chamber walls, she noticed something else. His hand, trembling, barely. The movement stopped the moment he realized she saw it. Silence stretched between them. Then another pounding hit the chamber doors, louder now. "Your Majesty," the guard shouted again. "Please!" Kale did not answer immediately. His breathing slowed once, twice, controlled by force alone. Alara stepped close enough to reach him before she could think better of it. The scent of snow, smoke, and iron surrounded him. Carefully, slowly, she lifted the clean cloth toward the blood staining his side. Kale caught her wrist halfway there. Fast enough to make her gasp softly, the room went completely still. Fire crackling, wind screaming outside, guards shouting somewhere below the tower. Yet neither of them moved. His grip remained crushingly strong for one suspended heartbeat. Then his eyes dropped to her face. Something shifted there. Small, dangerous, confused. The pressure around her wrist eased inch by inch until his fingers finally released her. And for the first time all night, the growling deep inside his chest stopped. By sunrise, the entire citadel knew her name. Not because Alara had done anything loud or remarkable, because the king had not sent her away. That frightened people more. Snow hammered the fortress windows while the royal court gathered once again beneath the towering black arches of the throne hall. Tension hung thick enough to feel in the air. Guards lined the walls in doubled numbers now, silver-tipped spears gleaming beneath torchlight. No one trusted the calm after last night, least of all the council. Kale sat upon the obsidian throne with one elbow resting against the carved wolf head beside him. The dark circles beneath his eyes were faint but visible now, sharpening the cold angles of his face. He looked exhausted. Dangerous, too. More dangerous, perhaps, because of the exhaustion. And standing several feet below the throne platform was Alara, alive, unrestrained, dressed not in servant gray anymore, but in a simple dark gown one of the royal attendants had hurriedly found before dawn. The fabric still hung slightly loose around her wrists. She kept her hands folded tightly in front of her, while dozens of eyes followed her every breath. Whispering moved through the court like insects beneath leaves. She's too calm. Maybe she bewitched him. Look at him watching her. No servant survives this long near the black wolf. Alara heard every word. Her shoulders tightened almost invisibly each time another murmur drifted across the hall. Kale noticed that too. His gaze shifted toward the nearest cluster of nobles. Silence immediately swallowed them whole. Then High Priest Malker stepped forward into the center aisle, crimson robes trailing behind him like spilled wine across the black marble floor. "Your Majesty," he began, voice echoing through the chamber. "The council requests permission to remove the girl from royal proximity until her influence can be properly examined." Alara's pulse visibly jumped at the word remove. One of the nearby servants lowered her eyes quickly, pity flickering across her face before disappearing again. Kale remained still for several long seconds. Too long. The delay unsettled the room more than an immediate refusal would have. His fingers tapped once against the throne arm. Slow. Thoughtful. The subtle hesitation spread unease through the court. Because for the first time in years, the Alpha King did not seem entirely certain. Malser stepped carefully closer. The kingdom cannot risk instability while rumors spread through the lower territories. Already the guards speak of strange behavior. Kale's expression hardened slightly. Strange. You carried a servant through the royal wing yourself. A dangerous pause followed. Somewhere high above the hall, thunder rolled across the mountains. Alara kept her eyes lowered, but she could feel the atmosphere changing around her. Court officials who had ignored her existence days ago now studied her like a problem waiting to explode. One elderly noblewoman lifted a jeweled fan toward her lips. "She looks terrified," she whispered softly to the woman beside her. "Good," came the answer. Kale heard that too. His jaw flexed once. Barely. Then Lord Varric rose from his seat near the southern delegates and descended the throne steps. Unlike the priest, he smiled when approaching Alara. That somehow felt worse. "Perhaps," Varric said smoothly, "the maid herself should answer a few questions before the court." Alara instinctively stiffened. Kale's silver eyes narrowed immediately. "Careful," the king said quietly. Varric ignored the warning. "Tell us, girl, what exactly happened inside the royal chambers last night?" Alara opened her mouth, then stopped when dozens of faces leaned toward her expectantly. The silence pressed hard against her chest. "I only changed his bandages," she answered softly. A few nobles scoffed under their breath. Varric smiled wider. "Only that?" Another step closer. "And somehow the king's curse quieted for the first time in months?" Alara took a small step backward before she could stop herself. The movement drew attention instantly. Kale's hand tightened against the throne arm. A thin crack splintered through the black stone beneath his fingers. Tiny, sharp, audible in the silence. Several guards glanced toward him nervously. Varric either didn't notice or pretended not to. "Did he touch you willingly?" The question hit the chamber like ice water. Alara froze. So did the room. Chaol slowly rose from the throne. Not violently. That made it worse. The scrape of black leather against stone echoed through the hall as he descended one step, then another, measured, controlled. His gaze never left Varric. "You are speaking," Chaol said softly, as though she belongs on trial. Varric's confidence faltered for the first time. "Just slightly. Your Majesty, the court merely seeks clarity." Another pause followed. Chaol looked toward Alara then, really looked at her, at the fear tightening her shoulders, at the way her fingers trembled once before curling tightly against her sleeves to hide it. Something shifted across his face again, brief, human, then gone beneath steel. "Enough," he said, and this time no one mistook the warning. For the first time in 3 days, Blackthorn Citadel became quiet. Not peaceful, just quieter. The shouting in the lower courtyards faded. Council meetings ended without slammed doors or raised voices. Even the storm outside weakened, leaving only thin curtains of snow drifting past the high castle windows. People began breathing again, carefully, as though the fortress itself might wake if they moved too fast. Alara noticed it immediately. Servants stopped staring quite so openly when she crossed the corridors. Guards no longer gripped their weapons every time she approached the royal wing. By the second evening, a few kitchen workers even offered her nervous smiles while pretending not to. It should have made her feel safer. Somehow, it didn't, because Chaol had become quieter too. That was worse. He spent most hours inside the Western Strategy Chamber, overlooking the frozen cliffs beyond the citadel. Maps remained spread across the massive oak table beneath dim candlelight, while military commanders came and went throughout the day. Yet every servant in the royal wing noticed the same strange thing. The king no longer allowed anyone else to bring food or wine into those rooms. Only her. The first time Alara carried a tray toward the strategy chamber, her hands trembled hard enough to rattle the silver cups. 2 guards outside the doors exchanged uneasy looks, but stepped aside without stopping her. Inside, Chaol stood near the enormous arched windows with one hand braced against the stone frame, while snow rolled through the dark mountains beyond. The fading sunset painted pale silver across the scars visible above his collar. He didn't turn immediately when she entered. "Leave it there," he said quietly. Alara obeyed at once, setting the tray carefully beside the scattered maps. The room smelled faintly of cedar smoke and ink, warm, controlled, nothing like the chaos from nights earlier. She should have left. Instead, her eyes drifted toward the blood seeping slowly through the fresh bandage beneath his shirt. Again, Chaol noticed the glance without looking directly at her. "It's healing." Not well. Silence followed. Small. Tense. Alara immediately regretted speaking. But then Chaol surprised her. "You always argue with your king?" His voice carried the faintest edge of dry amusement. Barely there. The sound startled her enough that she looked up too quickly. Their eyes met for one suspended second before she dropped her gaze again. "No, Your Majesty." Another pause. Longer this time. "Then stop calling me that when no one else is here." The words landed softly, yet Alara felt her pulse jump anyway. She didn't answer. Chaol finally turned toward her fully, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked less like a monster carved from winter, and more like a man who had not truly slept in years. Tiredness shadowed the sharp lines beneath his eyes. There was still danger in him, always, but quieter now, controlled. Alara reached carefully for the clean bandages resting beside the tray. "Sit down," she murmured, before thinking better of it. The room went still. Even the fire seemed to hesitate in the hearth. Chaol stared at her for a moment that stretched too long to be comfortable. Then, unexpectedly, he obeyed. The heavy wooden chair creaked beneath his weight as he lowered himself slowly. Alara moved closer with measured steps, trying not to notice how enormous he seemed sitting this near. She carefully loosened the dark fabric near his ribs. Fresh bruising spread across his side in deep shades of black and violet beneath the candlelight. Her fingers paused briefly above the damaged skin. Kale's breathing changed instantly. Not louder, slower. The subtle shift tightened something low in her chest. Neither of them spoke while she replaced the bandages. Outside the chamber windows, snow slid softly from the rooftops in heavy white sheets. Somewhere farther down the corridor, servants laughed faintly at something before the sound disappeared again. For a few fragile minutes, the world almost felt normal. Then Alara noticed it. Thin black veins creeping outward beneath the king's skin near the edge of the wound. Not bruises, something else. Something moving slowly beneath the surface. Her hand stopped. Kale saw the exact moment she noticed. The warmth vanished from his expression immediately. "Enough," he said quietly. Alara looked up at him. "What is that?" Kale rose too quickly from the chair. The movement startled the candles hard enough to flicker sideways. "You should go." His tone had changed again, colder now, closed off. Alara stepped back instinctively as he turned toward the darkened windows, shoulders rigid beneath the firelight. For several seconds, neither moved. Then, from somewhere deep below the citadel, a horn suddenly sounded through the night. Once, sharp, urgent. Kale's head lifted instantly. The calm inside the room shattered at once. The second horn blast shook the entire citadel before the first one had fully faded. Deep, violent, wrong. Alara nearly dropped the bandages in her hands as guards thundered past the strategy chamber outside. Shouts erupted through the corridors below them. Steel scraped from sheaths. Somewhere farther down the western wing, a servant screamed. Kale was already moving before the echo finished rolling through the stone walls. The cold distance had vanished from him instantly, replaced by something sharper, predatory. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and threw open the chamber doors hard enough to make the iron hinges slam against stone. "Report." The nearest guard stopped so abruptly his boots skidded across the floor. "Your Majesty," he panted, chest heaving beneath silver armor. "There's been an attack in the lower courtyard. 3 council horses found dead near the southern gate." Kale's expression did not change. Somehow that made the fear worse. "And?" The guard hesitated. Tiny pause. "Enough. Your name was carved into the stable wall beside the servant girls." Silence crashed through the corridor. Alara felt every face nearby turn toward her at once. Kale did not look back immediately. His shoulders had gone perfectly still beneath the black fabric stretched across them. Another guard appeared at the far end of the hall, dragging a frightened stable boy forward by the arm. The boy couldn't have been older than 14. Snow melted through his hair while terror shook visibly through his body. "He found the message, sire." The stable boy's eyes landed on Alara for half a second before dropping instantly to the floor. I didn't touch anything," he stammered. "I swear it." Kale descended the corridor steps slowly toward him. Too slowly. The guards around the boy shifted uneasily backward despite themselves. "What exactly did the message say?" the king asked. The boy swallowed hard enough for everyone to hear it. "The curse wakes because the servant still breathes." Whispering broke out almost instantly farther down the hall, nervous, sharp. A noblewoman covered her mouth. One council member muttered a prayer beneath his breath. Alara felt the atmosphere turning around her again, tightening like wire pulled too hard. The fragile calm from the last 2 days collapsed fast. Kale noticed it. She saw the exact second his gaze flicked briefly toward the nobles gathering beyond the archways. Calculating, measuring. Then High Priest Malker appeared from the eastern corridor with half the council behind him. Perfect timing. Too perfect. "This cannot continue," the priest declared, voice carrying through the royal wing. Fear spreads through the lower districts already. The people believe the king's curse has attached itself to the girl. Alara instinctively stepped backward. Kale noticed that too. His eyes narrowed slightly. "The people," he repeated coldly, "or the council?" Malser ignored the question. "Your Majesty, she must be isolated until the source of this corruption is understood." More murmurs rose immediately behind him, stronger this time, braver. The shift was subtle but dangerous. Fear had started becoming permission. Kale descended another step toward the priest. "No." One word. Quiet. Absolute. Yet the council did not retreat this time. Lord Varric stepped forward beside Mouser, jaw tense beneath carefully controlled composure. "Your Majesty, if more attacks follow, the nobles will demand action regardless of your wishes." The hallway fell silent again. Even the guards looked uneasy now. Kael's gaze moved slowly across the gathered faces, one by one, measuring loyalty, calculating risk. Alara stood near the strategy chamber doorway, trying not to breathe too loudly while the entire royal wing balanced on the edge of something terrible. Then another interruption shattered the moment. A servant girl burst into the corridor, carrying folded linens, before freezing at the sight of the assembled court. One sheet slipped from her arms onto the floor. No one moved to help her. The girl stared at Alara, then at Kael, then quickly backed away like she had walked into the den of something starving. The reaction landed harder than shouting would have. Alara's fingers tightened painfully against her sleeves. Kael saw that too. Something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. Not rage exactly, worse. Decision. He turned fully toward the council at last. "You speak as though she is responsible for what hunts this kingdom." Mouser lifted his chin. "And if she is?" The corridor temperature seemed to drop instantly. Kael stepped between Alara and the court without looking at her once. Deliberate, public, defiant. The movement sent another ripple through the gathered nobles. "Then," the Alpha King said softly, "whatever comes for her will go through me first." By nightfall, fear had spread beyond the castle walls. Torches burned across the lower districts beneath Blackthorn Citadel, while rumors moved through the kingdom faster than winter wind. Some whispered the Alpha King had gone mad. Others claimed the servant girl carried an ancient curse buried beneath human skin. By midnight, merchants were closing shops early. Temple bells rang twice without explanation. Even the wolves in the outer forest had stopped howling. Inside the citadel, no one trusted silence anymore. Guards rotated every hour now instead of every 4. Heavy iron gates sealed the western towers. Servants moved through corridors in groups, speaking only in hurried murmurs before glancing nervously over their shoulders. Everywhere Alara walked, conversations ended. She could feel it, the fear, the suspicion pressing closer each hour. Still, Kael refused to send her away. That frightened the court more than the attacks themselves. The royal council gathered again after sunset in the war chamber overlooking the northern cliffs. Rain mixed with melting snow hammered against the tall windows, while thunder rolled low beyond the mountains. The room smelled of wet leather, smoke, and tension stretched too tight. Kael stood at the head of the massive strategy table, while commanders argued around him. The lower villages demand reassurance. The nobles are preparing private guards. If panic spreads south, the trade routes collapse before winter ends. Voices layered over one another until the room became noise. Kael said nothing. That silence slowly became more unsettling than the shouting itself. Alara remained near the rear wall beside the fire, trying to stay invisible despite every glance drifting toward her eventually. She held a silver tray, untouched, in her hands, while steam curled upward from untouched tea. No one drank anything tonight. Then the chamber doors burst open hard enough to slam against stone. A bloodied messenger stumbled inside. Rainwater streamed from his cloak onto the floor. "Your Majesty," he gasped, barely steady on his feet. "There's unrest in the eastern quarter." The room froze instantly. "Speak." The messenger swallowed hard. A crowd gathered outside the temple district after sundown. Someone spread word the servant girl caused the Black Wolf curse to wake again. Alara felt every eye shift toward her immediately. "How many?" Lord Varric demanded. "Nearly 200 by the time I left." A low wave of murmuring broke out across the chamber. One commander cursed under his breath. Another reached instinctively for the silver dagger at his belt. Fear was becoming movement now, public, visible, dangerous. Kael finally lifted his head fully. "Were there injuries?" The messenger hesitated. Tiny pause, enough to sharpen the entire room. 3 temple guards were attacked trying to disperse the crowd. Thunder cracked outside hard enough to shake the windows. Alara's grip tightened unconsciously around the tray she carried. The silver rattled softly against porcelain. Kael heard it immediately. His eyes flicked toward her for one brief second before returning to the messenger. But that second mattered. Several council members noticed. Malzer noticed, too. The high priest stepped slowly forward through the candlelit chamber, crimson robes brushing across the wet stone floor. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "the kingdom fears what it does not understand. If the girl remains visible beside you, this unrest will only grow." Cale did not answer right away. He looked tired again suddenly. Not weak, just worn thin by something deeper than politics or violence. His fingers rested against the edge of the strategy table, while rain hammered endlessly against the glass behind him. "Then perhaps," Malzer continued softly, "she should be moved somewhere safer until tensions settle." Safer. The word sounded false the moment it left his mouth. Alara saw it in the faces around the room, too. Some avoided looking at her entirely now. Others stared openly with growing distrust. One older commander crossed himself beneath the table when he thought no one noticed. Cale noticed everything. The room waited. A long silence stretched between thunderclaps. Then another interruption cut through the chamber, this time from outside. Shouting. Loud. Closer than before. The sound rolled upward from the lower courtyards beneath the tower. Angry voices. Too many. The messenger's face drained white. "They followed me," he whispered. A guard rushed into the chamber a second later. "Your Majesty, civilians are gathering beyond the inner gates, demanding the servant be surrendered to the temple." The room erupted instantly. Chairs scraped backward. Several nobles began talking at once. One advisor actually stepped away from Alara as though standing too near her had become dangerous. The noise swelled fast until a deep growl suddenly rolled through the chamber. Not loud, worse because it wasn't. Every voice died immediately. Cale stood motionless at the head of the war table, silver eyes fixed on the storm-dark windows overlooking the burning torches gathering below the citadel. His breathing had slowed again, controlled too carefully, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded colder than the winter outside. "Lock the gates." The mob reached the inner gates just before dawn. Torches blazed beneath the fortress walls like rivers of fire cutting through the snowstorm, while hundreds of voices crashed together in furious waves below the citadel. "Give her to the temple! End the curse! Protect the kingdom!" The chants rolled upward through the mountain air, hard enough to shake the stained-glass windows inside the royal halls. Alara stood frozen near the center of the war chamber, listening to the fury rising beneath her feet. It sounded less like people now, more like hunger. Cale remained near the tall windows overlooking the lower courtyards, motionless except for the slow flex of one hand against the stone ledge. The veins beneath the skin near his wrist had darkened further, black now, crawling upward beneath the surface like spilled ink moving through water. He kept that arm hidden in shadow, but Alara had already seen it. Outside, the inner gates groaned as the crowd slammed against reinforced iron. Guards shouted over the chaos. Temple bells rang again, faster this time. Not warning bells anymore, judgment bells. "Your Majesty," Lord Varric said carefully from behind the strategy table, "if the gates fall—" "They won't," Cale's voice cut through the chamber instantly, cold, final. Yet something beneath it strained dangerously thin. Another impact thundered through the fortress below. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams overhead. One of the younger commanders stepped backward instinctively. Fear spread visibly through the room now. No one trusted what was happening anymore. Not the storm, not the crowd, not the king himself. Then the chamber doors opened slowly. Royal healer Saradine entered, carrying an ancient wooden case wrapped in black iron chains. The old healer's face looked pale beneath the candlelight. He did not bow immediately. That alone changed the air inside the room. Cale turned toward him at once. "You found it." Saradine nodded once before setting the chained case carefully across the strategy table. The metal clasps rattled softly. Every noble nearby shifted uneasily away from it. Alara stared at the strange markings burned into the wood. Wolves, crescent moons, thorned crowns, something ancient, something buried. "What is that?" Malzer demanded sharply. The healer ignored him completely, his eyes lifted instead toward Alara. Long pause. too long. "Her family seal," Saradine said quietly. Silence detonated through the chamber. Ilara blinked once in confusion. "What?" Saradine slowly unlatched the chains. 30 years ago, the royal bloodline ordered the execution of House Vale after rumors spread that their daughters carried the Moonrest gift. Cale's jaw tightened visibly. Tiny movement, but enough. "A myth," Mouser snapped immediately. "No," Saradine answered. "A fear." He opened the case. Inside rested a silver medallion blackened with age, beside several brittle scrolls sealed in wax. Alara's breath caught softly. The symbol engraved into the silver matched the small scar burned faintly into the inside of her wrist. The scar she'd carried since childhood. The same wrist Cale kept staring at whenever he thought she wouldn't notice. Suddenly the room felt too quiet. Outside, the crowd continued roaring beneath the fortress walls. But inside the chamber, no one moved. Saradine looked toward the king carefully. The Moonrest bloodline was said to calm the Black Wolf curse itself. Several nobles recoiled immediately at the words. One woman whispered a prayer. Another stepped backwards so fast she nearly knocked over a candle stand. Cale said nothing. That silence became answer enough. Alara looked toward him slowly. "You knew." His eyes met hers across the chamber, silver against silver firelight. Snow hammered the windows behind him. "The first night," Alara whispered, voice tightening faintly, "when you stopped the others from touching me." Cale's gaze lowered briefly toward her wrist. Callback. The bruises, the pauses, the hovering hand he never let himself finish reaching toward her. "You knew." Another crash exploded below the citadel as part of the outer barricade splintered beneath the crowd. Guards shouted, bells screamed, yet Cale still did not look away from her. "I tried to send you away twice," he said quietly. Not defensive, worse, honest. Alara's throat tightened painfully. "Then why didn't you?" For the first time since she met him, the Alpha King hesitated openly. His answer did not come immediately. The room watched him struggle with it in complete silence. Then his eyes closed once, briefly, like a man standing too close to an edge. "Because," Cale said softly, "the monster inside me stopped fighting whenever you touched me." The chamber went still. Even the storm seemed to pause. Then suddenly every torch along the walls blew out at once. Darkness swallowed the war chamber for one terrifying heartbeat after the torches died. Several nobles gasped aloud. Somewhere near the rear wall, a chair overturned sharply against stone. Outside, the roar of the crowd surged louder beneath the citadel, as if the kingdom itself felt something changing inside the fortress above them. Then silver fire erupted across the room, not from the hearth, from Kyle. The black veins beneath his skin ignited with pale light that spread slowly along his throat and jaw beneath the dim storm glow pouring through the windows. A few council members recoiled instantly. One dropped to his knees. Alara stared at him without moving. The Alpha King looked less human now than ever before. Ancient, dangerous, beautiful in the terrible way avalanches were beautiful just before they buried entire mountainsides. Yet his eyes remained fixed only on her. The crowd outside slammed against the gates again. Iron groaned violently through the fortress foundations. "Your Majesty," a guard shouted from beyond the chamber doors, "the eastern barricade is failing." Cale did not even glance toward the interruption. His breathing had become rougher now, slower between each inhale, controlled by force alone. Saradine looked between them with growing alarm. "The bond is surfacing," the old healer whispered. Mouser stepped backward immediately. "No." The priest's composure finally cracked completely. "No, this cannot happen." Thunder exploded overhead, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. Cale finally moved, one step toward Alara, then another. The nobles parted instantly without being ordered to. Fear reshaped the entire room around him. People lowered their eyes, retreated, some out of terror, others out of understanding. The shift spread quietly but visibly through the chamber. He was no longer protecting a servant girl. He was choosing her. Publicly, irreversibly. Alara's pulse hammered painfully beneath her ribs as Cale stopped directly in front of her. Up close, she could see the strain in every controlled breath he took. The silver glow beneath his skin flickered unevenly now, like something fighting beneath the surface. His hand lifted slightly toward her, then stopped halfway. Same hesitation as before, same pause. The monster feared touching her. The man feared needing to. Alara looked down briefly at the trembling hand suspended between them. Then, carefully, she closed the distance herself, her fingers wrapped softly around his. The reaction hit the room instantly. The silver fire racing beneath Cale's skin steadied all at once. The black veins stopped spreading. Several people gasped aloud. Saradin actually closed his eyes in visible relief. Outside, the wind that had battered the fortress all night suddenly weakened against the towers. Even the distant howling beneath the cliffs faded into silence. Kael stared down at their joined hands like he could hardly believe what he was seeing. The tension in his shoulders eased for the first time since the story began. Tiny change, massive impact. Ilara felt it immediately. So did the room. Malser looked horrified. "Your Majesty," he said sharply, desperation bleeding into his voice now. "If the people witness this—" "They will," Kael interrupted quietly. The priest fell silent. So did everyone else. Kael turned slowly toward the chamber doors where the sounds of panic and shouting still echoed through the fortress corridors. Then he looked back at Ilara. Snowlight reflected softly across her pale hair while the silver glow beneath his skin illuminated the sharp lines of his face. "Come with me." Not command, invitation. The difference stunned the room more than the magic had. Ilara hesitated only a second before nodding once. Together they crossed the chamber toward the massive balcony overlooking the inner courtyards of Blackthorn Citadel. Guards scrambled to pull the heavy doors open against the storm winds outside. The moment Kael stepped onto the balcony, the crowd below erupted into chaos. Hundreds of torches flickered across the snow-covered courtyards beneath them. Angry voices crashed upward through the freezing air. Then people saw her standing beside him. Silence spread unevenly at first, front rows, then farther back. Rippling outward through the mob like ice forming across dark water, Kael descended the first stone step overlooking the courtyard. Ilara remained beside him. Not behind him anymore. Beside him. The shift was small. The kingdom felt all of it. Snow drifted between them while every noble, guard, servant, and citizen watched from below. Kael's hand tightened around hers once before he raised their joined hands into the torchlight. No speech followed. None was needed. The crowd saw the silver glow steady beneath his skin where she touched him. They saw the curse retreat. They saw the Alpha King standing calmer beside a girl they once called disposable. One by one, guards lowered their weapons. Then several servants bowed their heads. Then soldiers. Then nobles. Slow at first. Then all at once. Even the storm seemed to kneel with them. And beneath the frozen skies of Blackthorn Citadel, the maid no one was allowed to touch became the only person the Alpha King could not survive without.